many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. We're going to first dive into something that Attorney General Jeff Sessions decided to pursue, and that is marijuana. But the first article I want to start off with, before I kind of get into Jeff Sessions, is one out of the Libertarian Republic titled "Cannabis Expert Thinks 35 States Will Legalize Weed by 2020." Says the marijuana movement is picking up steam. Krista Whitley, CEO of Nevada-based cannabis company Altitude Products, believes and predicts that 35 states will have legal marijuana by the year 2020. I would hope by 2020 we would have at least 35 thriving regulated cannabis states, she told the Daily Caller News Foundation. I am inspired by states like Tennessee and the movements that are happening in traditionally red conservative states that are seeking out common sense regulated cannabis programs. Altitude Products provides customers in the state of Nevada with marijuana-based products from various brands of medical and recreational use. Nevada legalized recreational marijuana by ballot initiative in 2016. I had not used cannabis until I was 30, Whitley told the DCNF in an interview. I was in a car accident and I was prescribed a bunch of opioids. I felt miserable. I've never felt more stoned than when I was on muscle relaxants and painkillers. A friend recommended she try marijuana as an alternative, and she hasn't looked back since. And we know opioids have led to the heroin epidemic and opioid epidemic that has really swept the country, and especially in, parts of the flyover nation. That tends to be where a lot of factory work is done, is in the inner part of the country where, more of the shipping and the office stuff tends to happen on the coastal side. And people that get hurt in factories go to the doctor. What happens? Here's some pain pills, usually some type of opioid. It says here, I smoked a joint and had the best week of my life. I felt more human, so that was catalyst for me. I started doing some serious research and re-examined some of what my own stereotypes. She added, despite the progress being made on the state level, the movement to legalize cannabis is being held back by the current White House Whitley said she slammed President Donald Trump and Attorney General Jeff Sessions as ignorant and said the next administration is more likely to make lasting changes. If our current president is entrepreneurial and a capitalist, as he claims to be, I think it would be common sense for him to deschedule marijuana. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen, she said. We continue to fight at the state level, but sadly, due to ignorant leadership like Jeff Sessions, I don't foresee this happening at a federal level. It will take our next administration to get there. And I hope that's not true. You can read the rest of that at the Libertarian Republic. I hope that's not true. I don't think that Trump is, let's go, kick down the doors of marijuana users. I don't think it's Trump, but I do believe that in Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions is a big government authoritarian. He loves the Patriot Act. He loves going after anybody that he disagrees with. Authoritarian. It doesn't matter if it's their right. If he don't like it, he would like to go after it. Definitely if there's any type of law, regulation, or anything on the books. And, trying to say, marijuana is illegal. Well, I'm sorry, but how did they make alcohol legal? They had to, change the Constitution. I brought this up many times. They had to change the Constitution. Because for the federal government to outlaw it, guess what? You have to change the Constitution. Because they knew it wasn't constitutional. So, our federal government comes up with this plan. Oh, yeah, we'll put a tax and a permit or, on it, a license on it. And, well, to get the license, you have to be in possession of it. But to be in possession of it, you need the license. But I don't have a license because I'm getting the license because it's a new law. Or you better not be in possession. Well, it says I have to be in possession to get the license. But it's illegal to be in possession without the license. Well, excuse me? Any judge that is in the right state of mind and being completely honest would have to throw that out in court. That tells you how many of them are really honest. They would have to go, well, you know what? The regulation is not even constitutional. I can't accept it. I took an oath to the Constitution. This is unconstitutional. But no, that's not what they do. I'm going to go ahead and dive in this Ron Paul Liberty Report titled, Mr. President Fired Jeff Sessions. So let's go ahead and dive into this.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Today, the co-host is Chris Rosini. Chris, good to have you with us today. Good. I want to talk a little bit about an individual that's been in the news this past week, and there's been a lot of interest, and that is a member of the President's Cabinet. He's the Attorney General. And, ordinarily, I do not volunteer too much advice for other people. I like to talk about ideas. I think if somebody doesn't ask me for advice, it's not worth much. But today, I'm going to break my own rules. We're going to give some advice here. And the advice is, Mr. President, why don't you fire this guy? Why don't you fire Jeff Sessions? He seems to be a menace. He's undoing some positive steps forward in curtailing some abuse of civil liberties. But he's taking a big step backward on this war on drugs. So I don't know, Chris, do you think we're going to be overstating our position if we're gently, but with a bit of force, to let the president know that he ought to really consider firing this guy, I don't think the country would be less well off.
Yes, and many people were surprised when he hired him in the first place, knowing his record. But Mr. Trump did. And the drug war, Dr. Paul, as we all know, is universally considered virtually a total failure. But once government gets started with something, even when it's a failure, getting rid of it is very tough because of their power of taxation. They take money and they just keep pumping it into failed businesses like Wall Street or the Postal Service or the schools, and we could go on and on. So getting rid of a failure is tough. But the states have been, one by one, going on their own because it's such a bad failure, this drug war. And now Jeff Sessions is trying to stand in the way.
That is right. And it's done more or less outside immediate consultation, even with the president, it seems, or with the Congress. But Obama had changed the rules on this. He made it so that the Justice Department could back off on these vicious enforcement of the laws that have been on the books, even though there have been attempts and laws passed where there was plenty of room for not enforcing these laws. The first one could be the Constitution because they're being enforced in an unconstitutional sense. So Obama lightens up, and that is the reason that he more or less gave a green light to the states that they can start living under their own laws, which, sound like a pretty good victory for states' rights and nullification. But along comes, Sessions now, and he's reversing that. It's all done by memo. It's not even considered an executive order. It's a memo that says, okay, the Justice Department, the officials can do what they want, and encourage them to use a strong enforcement of these laws. And it's created a lot of questions among the state officials. One having been the fact that they were looking forward to a lot of revenues, coming in from taxing this. I think that's one of the worst reasons to, legalize something, and because it's going to generate more revenue. Matter of fact, that's how some of these laws got started. It had to do with revenues, and it's because they're afraid to discuss the real issue of liberty, freedom of choice, who takes the risk, and where does this authority come from in the Constitution. They avoid this, and they generally use the power to tax, even though the original Constitution didn't have an income tax. The authority for the federal government to tax, unfortunately, was there. So they used this, and they've been using it in the effort to regulate drugs for a long time. The Harrison Act, 1914, it was a tax act. It put a tax on, the drugs. It wasn't a prohibition because they knew they couldn't do this. And then, of course, in 1937, it wasn't a prohibition, a federal prohibition against marijuana. It was a tax that was so high that nobody could use it, and then they enforced it, illegally. And then again, I think about the Obamacare. They knew they couldn't do certain things, but they had the power to tax. So the Supreme Court stretches this and says, oh, it's a tax. Then it's okay to destroy private practice, and they go on and on. But here and now, once again, they're talking about taxes. And even when they legalize drugs, to me, it's a disappointment because there's 100 different things you got to watch for, in guidelines. They never talk about who should be making a decision on taking a risk and who has the authority to be involved. Does the federal government have the authority to be involved? No, they just say that people might not act responsibly, therefore they have to have the government come in. I think it's interesting to find out that marijuana, matter of fact, they claim that they knew about marijuana 5,000 years ago. I haven't checked that out, but I bet they have been using marijuana for a long, long time. And just think, this is only recent history that these laws were written. When you think about the real vicious attack was 1937, and it was a tax. It wasn't a prohibition. I think also it's interesting that, when they wanted to have prohibition of alcohol, they knew they couldn't do that. That was obviously abuse to the Constitution. And therefore what they did was they just put a tax on it because they could get away with it. And then for alcohol, they amended the Constitution. But today there's so little respect for it. So I was hoping we'd see a sort of an opening here, with the drug laws and repealed in war on drugs. A war on drugs should be called the war on liberty. And I think we'd get a lot further along if we dealt with it on principle rather than this tinkering on the edges of pretending that they really care about states' rights.
No, they don't. And the way it's being liberalized is not ideal. As we all know, politicians love money, and Colorado, I read, has already collected hundreds of millions in taxes. So this is a financial incentive and kind of like a carrot, like, oh, look at all the money you could make in order to move towards liberty. At least if government's confiscating money, it's better than them killing people and throwing people into cages for smoking a plant and all the bad drugs that are out there, making people go to drug dealers. All of it is nonsense. So we could go after the taxes later, as long as we get a little bit of liberty to, choose what you could do with your own body and your own self, because you do own yourself and not some bureaucrat from Washington.
Maybe there will be some attention given to the discussion we're having today, because even this week, the Freedom Caucus in Congress, I wouldn't say they're hardcore libertarians. They certainly have libertarian leanings, and they're good conservative. But they think that Sessions is not a good attorney general, and they were suggesting to the president that maybe he ought to resign. They didn't ask him to get fired, but it's interesting what their beef is, which is a correct one, because in a way, here we have Sessions out there doing a lot of things he shouldn't be doing, enforcing these very, very vicious anti-smoking and drug laws. At the same time, he's saying that we should do this at all. So I think it's very interesting that the Freedom Caucus is doing this, but they're complaining that he hasn't done enough to look into Hillary affairs. And I think that's legitimate. All this scandal going on. And the truth is I don't know all the details, but for some reason, I strongly suspect that there's a great deal of bias in this investigation. And I'm not a great defender of Trump, but I think he's getting ripped off on some of these accusations. And a true investigation should be done. If you had an attorney general that was concerned, maybe he should. And I think the Freedom Caucus has a point that maybe Sessions should be doing more of that and a lot less of this drug enforcement laws.
Yeah, absolutely. And we looked at his voting record, and almost across the board, he's just real bad. Voted on extending the Patriot Act, roving wiretaps, voted no on requiring a FISA court warrant to monitor U.S. phone calls to foreign phone calls. So, I mean, when it comes to our privacy, our liberty, Jeff Sessions is not a fan whatsoever, which is why many people are like, why is Trump hiring Sessions in the first place? So it is good to see with the House Freedom Caucus, and the more pressure applied, the better, in our opinion.
Indirectly, I think what Sessions is doing is increasing the odds of more racism in this country. What are you talking about? He's not a racist, this sort of thing. But if you look back at the laws, even back in the Harrison Act, it was motivated by the Mexicans coming over here, and they were smoking this stuff, and it was a racist issue. Even in 1937, it was racist. They were going to punish Mexican immigrants because they were using this terrible, terrible drug. Seems like a lot of Americans have learned to use it since then. But it definitely was racism. And the laws are vicious. And this is one place where I truly believe racism exists in this country. I think it's the last place. It has nothing to do with the charges of racism from the radical left. Always saying, that the black people need affirmative action and all these things that I think are just, trying to correct a problem that doesn't exist. But I do believe it's in the judicial system. If you look at what's been happening if you look at all the drug dealers in the country, there's 16% of them are black drug dealers. That's probably close to the population. But if you look at the arrests of people who are dealing drugs, 49% are blacks. And then if you go to the next step, what percent are put in prison? 74% of the people put in prison for drugs are black. Now, there's something awfully suspicious about that. Blacks are poor, they're in the inner city, and some prosecutor has to make a name for himself. They don't have good protection, and there's all kinds of excuses. But does that mean that there aren't problems there? There's a lot of problems. But the biggest problem is this lack of necessity to have all these laws and locking people up. And then you add on to this the private ownership of prisons. You know, you have some people for religious reasons, and you have people who run prisons, and you have people who think they're doing good work, God's work, by telling people not to do drugs. And they use all these things, but it adds up. I think it's a very bad situation. And if they expand now all these arrests and violations, I mean, Sessions has endorsed, asset forfeitures and SWAT teams and all these things that just violate liberties, which would disappear to a large degree. They wouldn't be associated with drugs anyway. So people say, well, this is crazy. Who ever heard of not having laws against drugs? United States of America didn't have them. Up until 1914, there were no laws. And how often do people go back and read the history? Sure, there was abuse. But it goes back to this whole concept of who's supposed to, decide on risk. Who's going to take a risk and do risky behavior? This is using drugs as a risky behavior. There's a risk in going to doctors giving you too many drugs, and you have to be careful. So, but risk is supposed to be managed in a free society by the individual, not by the do-gooders who have ulterior motives. So, and that, I think, is what's going on. So, in a way, I'm not predicting it's going to happen because I don't think Sessions is going to be as successful as he thinks. But I think if he is this successful, I think it will just continue this discrepancy on who's going to be arrested. And that to me is a real shame. And of course, economics comes into this play too, because the economic system we have right now encourages and endorses poverty over the benefits to the very wealthy, and poverty plays a part in this too. But I think there's a lot of good reasons why we should give up on this war on drugs. And I think the most important justification for getting rid of it is a liberty society, people who believe in liberty. I do not believe our Attorney General has the vaguest idea what civil liberties mean, and that he in his heart probably believes he's doing the Lord's work. But he is misled, and this activity is being misled, and the president appointed him, and he knew what his voting record was like. He's even criticized Sessions in public, which was pretty harsh, and people say, is this guy going to hang around? But then he goes around and supports what he does. So, but I think, Chris, maybe there's some positive things that may come of this. At least I'm always looking for the positive things that might come from an incident like this.
I'd like to close first on a positive note, I hope. And that's, there are people out there like Sessions, there's tons of them, and they gravitate to government when they have this lust to dominate others and tell people what to do. Government is the perfect vehicle for them. And the first place that they like to start is with our minds. And we're bombarded from all angles, whether it be in the news or Hollywood or in schools. It's all to, so that we can obey, authority. And after the mind comes, what are we left with? Our body. So that's what the drug war is a war on. Our ability to choose and what we put into our body. It doesn't have to start with drugs. They can move on to foods and everything else. So it's important for us to just say no and take control of our minds, our bodies, and live them the way that we would like to, the way that we were intended to.
In spite of, this setback, I think it's going to be minor. Matter of fact, I'm going to stick to an argument I've made 30 years ago, that one day the American people will wake up and say this drug war is idiotic. That is what we did, in the 20s, and there was the repeal of prohibition, and because it didn't make any sense. It's not quite as dramatic, but it's been happening. The libertarians deserve a lot of credit for this, and the principle of nullification by the states. Don't obey, don't follow, neutralize, and nullify vicious federal laws. That principle, has generally been undermined. But right now, I think it's alive and well. I don't think Sessions is going to win this. And one thing that I don't endorse is the fact that the people who are looking forward to collecting taxes will be on our side, that, that we not do this. But I'll tell you what, I think there's a lot of people who understand the damage done. And one other fact I did mention a minute ago is that the people who take the drugs, suffer the consequences, and the law enforcement is so discriminatory. For instance, crack cocaine and powder cocaine, and that's another reason why blacks get more punishment than whites. But I think there's enough people now that have seen the detriment. A lot of people ask me, how in the world did you run in the 70s and 80s and 90s and have this position in the Bible Belt? Nobody would have answered a questionnaire at that time that the percentage of people who were for getting rid of the drug war were very, very small. But I won the elections, and my suspicion was that almost every family had been touched one way or another by the vicious violations of rights and the destruction of life by hauling kids off to prison for this. And so I think the people were further along. I always think the people were further along than the Congress. And right now, I think that movement in that direction and the realization has happened. I think we're there, and they're not going to cancel it out. I just want to urge, let's not make the argument the right to smoke a joint. That is not my point. But it's maybe the right to do it. But it's a liberty issue, the right to make your own decisions. And it's not a narrow issue of just a permission to use this particular drug. It should be the following the Constitution. This idea, the one other argument they use for the federal supremacy clause, that any kind of conflict between the states and the federal government, the Supreme Court of the land, and the Supreme Court in the Constitution says so, which is a lie. Read the 10th Amendment. That doesn't say that. There's a supremacy clause that is dealing with those issues that both the state and the federal government are involved in. Then there is a conflict, like anything in Article 1, Section 8. If there's a dispute over there, that then would be the case. But no, the supremacy of the federal government has been grossly distorted, and that's why we have that monster in Washington. But anyway, I'm going to finish with a positive note and saying Sessions is not going to win because the people have awakened. He's going to hear from them. There's going to be a lot of noise made, and people who are collecting those taxes are going to see this as an a time to come down hard on them. So I vote for liberty and responsibility, and that I think wins out in the long run. But if we win on this issue, we have a lot of other issues that we have to work on as well. Chris, I want to thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul.
And I want to thank our viewers today for tuning in, and please come back soon to the Liberty Report.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out. Subscribe. Sounds like my mic's a little low. I don't know. Okay. Now, I don't think Jeff Sessions is going to win. But again, there's a lot of questions when it comes to, how the courts are going to handle it, if they're going to recognize state nullification. It all leans on that. But he's already basically lost in the public side for the most part. And even though I'm for people's right to choose what they put in their body, I'm really, more interested in the medical side of marijuana because of what I've seen the pharmaceutical and the healthcare industry do to people. I've seen a lot of harm that has come out of it. And I'm not seeing that coming out of the medical marijuana. I'm not talking even about recreational. I'm talking about legitimate medical problems that you see medical marijuana used for? Epilepsy. You know, when you have someone that's seizuring, 10 times a day, they go to the doctor and they're put on all kinds of medication that some of these people end up seizuring, 25 times a day. They go to medical marijuana, it's like one time a week or one time every couple weeks or a month. There's a problem there. There's a problem there when the pharmaceutical and the doctors legally prescribe you stuff that causes more harm. Not saying medical marijuana is going to be there's people out there that claim it works for everything. No, I don't believe that. I think that becomes an excuse just to use it. Push for recreational use. Push for the government not choosing what you put in your body. I'm completely against, crack and heroin and all that. But I also don't believe the government should dictate what you put in your body. Now, if you go and get cracked out and decide to break into someone's house, you pay the price for that. Not for what you put in your body, and I don't care if it's what you put in your body that caused you to do it. You chose to put that in your body, and nowadays we know the side effects of crack and heroin and all this, these other hard drugs. So if you decide to take it anyways, and you do something stupid, guess what? You pay for it. Just like alcohol. Oh, there's a legal drug that people break the law and drive after they drink too much. Yeah, the law saying you can't drive after you drink doesn't stop them, just like law saying you can't have or do crack, heroin, or any of these other drugs that are illegal. Doesn't stop them from doing it and doesn't stop them from doing the stupid stuff on it. Spend a hell of a lot of taxpayer money chasing all these hopes and dreams of stopping everything. And it's only made it worse. And it's only made real criminals, real, psychopaths, extremely wealthy. Maybe not in this country, but other countries. Don't you have to go after those people? Legalize it. I do have an article here from Reason.com. As Sessions moves against state legal weed, Vermont lawmakers approve marijuana bill. And this kind of goes along with that last one I covered right before the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Just hours after Attorney General Jeff Sessions signaled a shift in how the federal government would view state-level laws legalizing the production, sale, and possession of marijuana. Vermont took a step toward becoming the 9th state to legalize weed for recreational purposes. The Vermont House voted 83 to 61 last night to approve a bill legalizing the possession of marijuana, sending the measure to the state Senate, where, according to local media reports, it is expected to pass. The bill does not legalize buying and selling pot, a previous effort that would have created a market for recreational marijuana was vetoed last year by Republican Governor Phil Scott. The bill approved Thursday is supposed to be a compromise with the governor's office, according to the Burlington Free Press, but Scott has not yet indicated whether he will sign the bill. In the meantime, neighboring New Hampshire could move a marijuana legalization bill this month, coming as it did in the hours after Sessions announced plans to rescind the Cole memo, the Obama-era guidance that essentially told federal prosecutors to leave marijuana businesses alone in states that had voted to legalize. It's easy to interpret the Vermont vote as an immediate flexing of federalism, but in reality, the Vermont bill has been subject to months of negotiations in Montpelier, and the timing is coincidental. Indeed, some lawmakers suggested postponing yesterday's vote in light of the developments in Washington, the Free Press reports. Still, Vermont's movement on marijuana is potentially important for two major reasons. First, legalizing via legislation is an important shift in how states handle marijuana policy. Just as politics are downstream from culture, legislators are downstream from voters' desires. Data from the Pew Research Center shows that 61% of Americans now favor legal recreational marijuana, up from just 33% at the turn of the century. Even as those numbers steadily tick upwards, and even as voters have repeatedly demonstrated their preference for legal weed via referendum, state lawmakers have been unwilling to put their names on the line and vote for marijuana legalization. This week's developments in Montpelier suggest that voters' preferences and public opinion about marijuana are finally filtering down to state houses. Secondly, the bill's success, even in the wake of Sessions' announcement, could signal a backlash against the Trump administration that counterintuitively might boost the chances of legalization in other places. Tom Engel, editor of the online trade publication Marijuana Movement, points out that opposition to Sessions' move has come from all sides of the political spectrum: Democratic, Republican, House, and Senate members who almost never talk about marijuana except when asked about it, proactively release statements pushing against Sessions. Engel writes, by trying to launch a crackdown, Sessions might finally force a resolution to the murky gray area between state and federal marijuana laws. Legislators are geographically and ideologically diverse, as Republican Rob Blum, Republican from Iowa, and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, reacted to Sessions' announcement by calling for the feds to leave state legal weed alone, and Senator Cory Gardner, Republican from Colorado, announced he would delay nominations for Justice Department officials until Sessions offered a better explanation about what the policy shift will mean for states that have already legalized weed. In many ways, the GOP backlash is more important than the actions of blue staters like Pelosi or the Democrat-controlled Vermont legislature. For one, it's a signal that even some Republicans believe Sessions has stepped out of line. More importantly, Republicans control the vast majority of state legislators and governorships at the moment. If there's going to be real policy backlash against Sessions, it will have to come from Republicans, including Vermont's Governor Scott. And hopefully Vermont's Governor Scott signs that and really sends a signal to Sessions. I think it's Sessions that you have to send it to more than Trump. I think Trump's afraid to fire Sessions in the state of what everything's at right now. I think it would be in his best interest if he says screw all that and just does it. Just fire Sessions. Find someone that is more of a libertarian constitutionalist, because I think that would align with the president a little bit more. And I'll tell you why. Because libertarians tend to, spark a little interest with more liberal people and conservative people, where a libertarian can touch on the small government things that you tend to find in constitutionalists and stuff in the conservative side of things. They can also relate with things that tend to be more liberal leaning, like marijuana. Not going, hey, we like crack and heroin and marijuana. It's no, I don't believe the federal government has that right. And when you want to appeal to that and you want to appeal to the constitutional conservatives, constitutionally, that should be a state's right. It's not delegated to the federal government. That's why when they made alcohol legal, they had to amend the Constitution to prohibit. And when it failed, like the drug war is doing, they rescinded it. Look at facts. Appeal to both sides. I think there's a little bit of libertarian in Trump, not a lot. Believe me, not a lot. Because he still has that, now I'm president. Now I need to have the say in what goes on. That's more authoritarian. Now, we'll have to just watch and see what Congress members, states, governors, state houses, all these people start reacting to this. If we see more legislation get passed in more states, we might see something come out where basically Sessions would have to come out and go, well, we're rescinding that Obama era one, but I wrote one that basically says the same exact thing. I wasn't trying to go after no one, even though for a lot of us that have followed politics and Jeff Sessions, you kind of know where he lands on that. He's not for it. But to save face, what will come out of this, it really depends on, I think, the article was right there at Reason, the pushback from Republicans. Which if you're truly conservative, if you're truly constitutional and you're on the right, states' rights. That's what that comes down to. It's not whether you like marijuana, but you respect the Constitution and believe it's a state right. If that's who you claim to be, you're a constitutional conservative, then that's a state right. Just because your side's in and you're not for marijuana shouldn't overrule the sense of why the Constitution was written and why things were delegated to the states rather than the federal government. Because if we have another person like Obama in office, all those complaints you had about Obama, you won't be able to put on the next president, because guess what? You said, well, this new Democratic president, it's not respecting states' rights. The states' rights. Well, if you're for Jeff Sessions doing this, you didn't respect states' rights either. That tends to be how, libertarians fall in the middle somewhere, is because we look at both sides of it. And really, both sides should be able to go, states' rights. Simple as that. What easier way for the left and the right to come together, no matter what government wants to do, and say, no, we're standing against it. And even if, you're a constitutionalist and you voted for Trump and you're a Trump supporter, the best Trump supporter is the one that's going to hold his feet to the fire. So now what's the next step? Again, we'll see what happens with Republican political leaders and see how much pushback we actually get from them. Okay, we're going to move on here. Give me a second. This is working right. Make sure I'm still connected to you guys too. I know the internet's been a little sketchy around here, so let's see. Okay. Now I'm not going to play the whole clip, but I'm going to play most of the clip. But this is Stefan Molyneux and Roger Stone. Now, I'm not a big fan of Roger Stone. I don't trust him, but I don't know him either. But I do know that he has put out a lot of information, since Trump has been elected, even though he hasn't been, a part of the cabinet or nothing. He's been pretty accurate on things. Not, 100%, but he's been pretty accurate. Well, this is something I believe that's been going on, and people know my criticism of Trump, but that doesn't mean I don't think there's a deep state coup going on. And I think because they cannot control Trump. Trump is his own person. Even if he does things they like, they're not controlling it. And that scares them. And I do believe there is a deep state coup. And I could go in and explain, but that would take me long enough right there. But basically, the deep state is made up of a lot of wealthy people, political figures, world leaders, corporate leaders. It's a mix of different people. But there are people at the very top, people that control a lot of the resources, including the government. But the deep state needs control of all three branches. So that's where they're having a little bit of issue is, we don't have a puppet in the White House that will just go along with everything we want. Even though I believe he's giving them a bone here and there so he could get things that he wanted. But I think he also gets played. And I think that even though the tax cut will be good, the simple fact that it's permanent for the corporations, but a 5-year, I think it was, for, the everyday individual, kind of, that says that they put that in there, but put a limit on it so that they can revisit that. And 5 years, 4 years of presidency, 5 years. I'm almost wondering if they're going to do everything possible, make sure he doesn't get elected. It might not even be to overthrow him while he's president. It's to make sure he don't get a second term. I think that's what that comes down to. But we'll see. if they can't, crash the economy, which that could be what the bubble's about right now. But we'll get into this clip here and we'll cover that.
Roger Stone, happy New Year to you and to Roger. He is a well-known political operative and pundit, a veteran of 9 national presidential campaigns. He has served as a senior campaign aide to 3 Republican presidents. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, the case against LBJ, as well as the Clintons' War on Women and Jeb and the Bush crime family, the inside story of an American dynasty, and the making of the president 2016, how Donald Trump orchestrated a revolution. You can find Roger's excellent work. We'll put links to the books below, rogerstone.com, stonecoldtruth.com, and stonezone.com. Roger, thanks so much for taking the time. I hope your hangover is better.
I am delighted to be with you, Stefan. And again, I know that you had tried to reach out to me back when I testified for the House Intelligence Committee, and we were unable to make connections. So I am delighted to be with you now.
2018 may be the fall of a large number of delusions. First among them, it seems vaguely possible that the saner elements of the left might begin to see through the giant civilization-rending mirage of the Russia collusion story. Where do you think things are in that narrative at the moment, and where do you think it's going to go?
Well, Donald Trump has once again confounded his critics. I think it's important to review the facts that after his election, the political establishment, the two-party elites in the duopoly who were in complete and utter shock over his victory, first demanded a recount. That failed. Then they tried to monkey with the Electoral College to undo his election. That failed. And then they invented the entire Russian collusion narrative, which is largely a myth, or at least I would say half right. In other words, there was a major party candidate in bed with the Russians. There was a major party candidate for president whose minions were making literally millions of dollars out of their associations with some of the oligarchs around Vladimir Putin. Unfortunately, that candidate was not Donald Trump. So this narrative, which has been repeated ad nauseum in the national mainstream media and by the Democrats on Capitol Hill, specifically in the House and Senate Intelligence and Judiciary Committees, is exactly that. It's a scandal without evidence. It's a charge without any proof or any facts. And then when they have stumbled on a fact, for example, Donald Trump Jr. having a meeting with a Russian woman lawyer, well, now they try to make that meeting something it was not. Such a meeting would not be illegal or improper in any way. Nothing came of the meeting. The woman lawyer had no material to provide regarding the activities of Hillary Clinton. But what is curious to me, Stefan, is the fact that the woman lawyer was in the country illegally, that she had no visa to be here. So the Obama administration let this woman into the country for some reason, and we now have been able to tie her very clearly to Fusion GPS. So what this is, in my view, was a setup, and then the Adam Schiffs and the Mark Warners of this world try to make it something it is not. The political establishment, even the same liberals like the folks at The Nation, have now figured out that this is a giant nothing burger. There is no evidence of collusion, conspiracy, or coordination with the Russians to increase the chances of the election of Donald Trump. The American people have moved on. The Democrats, I think, keep trying to breathe life back into a phony narrative, but there is just no there.
Well, I think it's wonderful that they keep doing that. I mean, you never interrupt your enemy when he's in the process of making these kinds of mistakes, alienating themselves from the voter base. And of course, the longer they pursue this particular narrative, Roger, of course, the longer they're not trying to develop policies that might be even remotely appealing to the voter base in America. And it's really wild, too, because the whole thing seems to hinge on this idea that the Russian government hacked the DNC and then released the information of WikiLeaks? Well, WikiLeaks seems to have openly said recently that Russia was not a source for WikiLeaks documents. And of course, because there's no null hypothesis, this is all crazy paranoid talk, therefore you can't disprove it. They're like, oh, well, WikiLeaks is lying. Like, there's just no truth to be found anywhere here.
Well, but unfortunately for some of us, it has a reality. Recognize that Donald Trump and I are being sued in the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. The allegation very specifically is Stone and the Trump campaign worked together with the Russians to hack the DNC and give the material to WikiLeaks. That is a lie. And that is a charge for which there is no evidence or proof whatsoever. Next thing you know, the entire front line of the Obama NSA, John Brennan, James Clapper, Admiral Rogers, the entire shaved head brigade, as I like to call them, they filed a brief in my lawsuit recycling their same garbage. The Russians interfered in our elections. The Russians burrowed into our system. They also continue to offer no proof or no evidence. Stefan, so far this lawsuit has cost me and my family just under $480,000, and that's just to make the motions to dismiss it as frivolous. The group bringing the lawsuit, Project for Democracy, is an Obama-blessed front group. They're using the lawsuit for fundraising purposes. But here is the point. Last week, Donald Trump's lawyers went into the court in this lawsuit and declared that Julian Assange was a journalist and that his publication of materials that may be classified and may be purloined is not illegal. It is what the Washington Post and the New York Times do. They cited the Pentagon Papers case, the New York Times versus the U.S. government, to make it abundantly clear. Now, the Trump administration seems here to be speaking with two voices. On the one hand, Donald Trump's lawyers are in court saying Assange is a journalist who's done nothing wrong, and Mr. Pompeo and Mr. Sessions are somehow arguing that Assange is a criminal and he's violated the law. I'm sorry, I don't see what law he has violated. He's not a Russian asset. WikiLeaks is not a Russian front. That is a fake news promulgated by the U.S. intelligence services and their allies in the mainstream media. They want it to be true. That does not make it true.
Do you think, and I'm sorry to hear about these legal bills, that is an astonishing amount of money, and my sympathy goes out to you. Do you have any fundraising going on regarding that?
Some friends of mine have set up a legal defense fund. You can go to stonedefensefund.com, stonedefensefund.com. We are slowly raising money. I think perhaps people believe because I dress nattily that I am an extremely wealthy man. I am not. I was prepared to pay all the legal expenses for the House Intelligence Committee investigation, for the Senate Intelligence Committee investigation, for the House and Senate Judiciary Committee investigations. That has run several $100,000 as well. But this new frivolous harassment lawsuit is an attempt to bankrupt me and to silence me, and I think to sidetrack me in the coming fight in which I still believe the deep state will attempt to remove this president.
Right. Well, it does seem like there's some, I've referred to it as a kind of soft coup, which is that it's hard to get good people to work for you if they know that stepping into the administration is going to expose them to hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially of legal bills and attempting to defend themselves against endless investigations. It's a way of crippling the administration. It's a way of driving people out of the administration and making it harder to get good people into the administration. It's highly, it is a huge amount of interference in the fundamental running of the presidency at the moment.
Well, it's lawfare is what we call it. They are essentially weaponizing the judiciary to try to achieve what they could not achieve at the ballot box. Let's talk about the Mueller investigation and where I believe this is going. First of all, I don't think the president could have had a better month than December. He passed a record a tax cut. The stock market's hitting all-time highs, unemployment at all-time lows, a boom in the housing market, real serious progress in terms of making America great again. Robert Mueller could not have had a worse December. The people who work for him and the people at the Obama Justice Department are so arrogant, so certain that Hillary Clinton would be elected, and therefore their internal official emails would never be said or read, exposed their partisanship, exposed their bias, exposed their lack of objectivity, and exposed their motives in a stunning set of emails, texts, and other documents. The Mueller effort is stripped bare. It's a partisan hit squad, and even they have found no evidence of collusion with the Russians. Paul Manafort gets indicted, but he gets indicted for business activities that have no relationship to Donald Trump. He shall have his day in court. I believe that General Flynn's indictment is bogus. First, they illegally surveil Flynn to listen to everything he's doing. Then they set up a series of questions hoping to trip him. Then they send in an FBI agent in an early morning raid where Flynn has no attorney, and they charge him not with perjury, but with lying to an FBI agent. This looks like a setup to me. Now, we know that General Flynn, who I believe is a great American, said that a senior member of the Trump transition team instructed him to reach out to the Russian ambassador for purposes of setting up a meeting. Again, a perfectly legal and proper activity for General Flynn, part of his job description. This is at a time when Donald Trump had already been elected and was president-elect.
Oh, but it was sorry, just for those who don't know, it was originally reported as having occurred before the election. And then, of course, these big corrections had to come out, which is kind of it's a big difference if you're dead or alive if they bury you. You'd think they'd like to get those facts right.
Exactly. So in this case, they have indicted Flynn on a process crime. And Flynn has said that a senior member of the transition ordered him to do that. Let us suppose, most likely, that that is the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Now, Kushner has had many hours of FBI interrogation. Did they lead him into a misleading statement about this directive to Flynn, and therefore is he next to be indicted? I believe that may be the case. Mueller is desperate to regain the upper hand. He has lost it. Between the revelations about Peter Strzok and the other corrupt aspects of his investigation, his public credibility is slipping badly. I think he intends to indict Kushner, perhaps in a bid to get the president to fire him. All of this, Trump is going to fire Mueller, is not being generated by Republicans or people close to the president. It's being generated by Democrats. It's called the Briar Patch strategy. It is what they want the president to do. Fire Mueller, who, by the way, certainly deserves to be fired, and there are certainly legitimate grounds on which to fire him. But firing Mueller would create the media firestorm they want to get back to their ridiculous narrative that Trump has removed Comey, now removing Mueller to cover up his own wrongdoing. That is, of course, false. I wrote a very long piece for the Daily Caller and for InfoWars last week, making the case that what the president should do is as follows. 1, fire Rod Rosenstein. You have grounds. The appearance of conflict of interest with the special prosecutor he selected is grounds for firing. Now, order Jeff Sessions, which is the president's full authority and right to do. The Justice Department is an extension of the executive branch. Order Jeff Sessions to appoint a special counsel in the matter of Uranium One. That special counsel would necessarily begin their investigation on Mr. Mueller, Mr. Comey, former FBI Assistant Director McCabe, and oddly enough, Rod Rosenstein. If Sessions should demur, he would surely have to resign. Rosenstein having been removed first, the decision over a special prosecutor would not go to him. He would be conflicted anyway, since such a special prosecutor would have to look into the activities of Mr. Rosenstein. The decision would then go to the Solicitor General who I believe would carry out the president's order. Let me bottom line this. The appointment of a special counsel in Uranium One would completely and totally checkmate Robert Mueller and his witch hunt.
Right. I tell you though, Roger, I mean, I try not to be overly cynical about this stuff, but there's a part of me that's like, oh, another special investigator. Oh, that's going to go someplace because there's going to be a slow walk. I mean, they're refusing to hand over documents to Congress. I mean, do you feel that this could really get somewhere? It feels like everything's just become so sclerotic and paralyzed. It's like this Medusa stare of injustice is turning the wheels of the courts to stone.
Well, the problem you have, though, is we are operating, without benefit of a special counsel law. The law that governed these appointments has expired. Originally, a special counsel appointed to look into and prosecute a specific crime had to have the written permission of the Attorney General to expand the scope of his investigation, had oversight from a 3 federal judge panel. Because no such law is in place, Mueller is completely unchecked. He can dig into Donald Trump's real estate developments 20 years ago. He can look at Paul Manafort's businesses 20 years ago. There are no limits on where he can go and what he can do. Therefore, I argue that one must fight fire with fire. Uranium One is perhaps the single largest treasonous crime in U.S. history. It's ironic because the very people accusing Donald Trump of being in bed with Russian special interests were, in fact, in bed with Russian special interests. It is they who are guilty of treason, and they line their pockets while doing so. So my question to you, Stefan, would be this. Who do we want as that special prosecutor? Judge Andrew Napolitano? Andrew McCarthy? Congressman Trey Gowdy? Perhaps former U.S. Attorney Rudy Giuliani? I think they could all do a superb job.
Oh, I would go with McCarthy, although I love Judge Napolitano simply because it would be fun to watch the left scream about McCarthyism once more. I didn't get enough of it the last time. Now, do you think that this Russia collusion thing might have been what the FBI agents were referring to in their text when they talked about this mysterious insurance policy regarding the potential? Because it's got to be really frustrating for the left in that they did some work to actively promote Donald Trump because they thought he would be the easiest candidate to beat, and it kind of blew up in their faces.
Well, if you go back to the time the Electoral College was about to meet to vote, which would have the legal effect of approving the president's election, John Podesta, the Clinton campaign manager, argued that the Electoral College needed a briefing on the collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians before the vote. Well, John, that would have been a very, very brief briefing because there is no evidence to that effect. There's a lot of evidence that you and your brother lined your pockets. There's the gas deal. There's the uranium deal. There's the banking deal. So, yeah, there were political operatives involved in the presidential campaign making millions off of Putin, but they weren't Republicans.
It's kind of a weird thing, too, just by the by. I think this has struck just about everyone who looks at this. When you look at people who make $200,000 a year, $300,000 a year, maybe $4,000, when they get into government and there's this giant supernova of assets, like they suddenly start going into the millions. And this seems to be quite a common thing. And it has me sort of wondering, and this is partly why I was interested in Trump, was who the hell is not compromised? Maybe none of this stuff like Uma Abedin's, the revelation that she sent logins to her Yahoo account before that Yahoo account, along with hundreds of millions of others, was hacked by foreign governments, I think is the latest understanding. Maybe everybody's neck deep in gasoline outside of maybe Trump, and nobody wants to light the fire.
Well, there's something to what you say. In the sense of the emails from Huma Abedin, my source is in the New York Police Department. And remember, that's where the story begins. It is the New York Police Department who are investigating Anthony Weiner for potentially texts to underage girls. And it is in the course of that investigation that they become aware of this large trove of emails, which Huma has forwarded from her State Department server to a personal server that she shares with her husband. My sources tell me that what was released by the State Department last week was a tiny fraction of the material that is there. It is largely just those documents that pertain to State Department business. They include classified documents. Therefore, they are a graphic demonstration of violation of the law by Huma Abedin. But I believe that there's far more in that trove of emails. I'm told by a high-ranking member of the New York Police Department that there is evidence of corruption, pedophilia, sex trafficking, cover-up of sex crimes, and even worse, the original conjecture of the NYPD was that this was Huma's blackmail file, meaning this is the material that she compiled for her own protection if the Clintons ever decided to turn on her, as they have turned on virtually everyone who has ever worked loyally for them.
What do you think is the holdup in getting this information out? Is it just too explosive? Is it still being investigated? What's the delay, do you think?
Well, to answer that question, I would have to understand Jeff Sessions and the Trump Justice Department. I watched the Senate hearing when Sessions was asked when he would investigate Hillary Clinton, and he said, I can't see anything to investigate her about. This guy has all the visual acuity of Ray Charles. It is so obvious that it's absurd. There's the Clinton Foundation, slush fund for grifters, and obviously the facilitation, the platform for the facilitation of multi-million-dollar bribes. There is the entire Uranium One narrative. There is the theft of the earthquake relief funds in Haiti. I could go on for hours in terms of the various Clinton crimes that should be investigated by this attorney general. And he still, although he occasionally makes a feint in the right direction, or we hear that FBI agents question people about something regarding the Clintons, that's not an investigation, nor is it an indictment. So it's very hard to know why we have not seen the rest of these emails, other than to say it right now is under the control of Jeff Sessions' Justice Department. And sadly, that means it is under the control of de facto Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Rosenstein is running the show. He is a close associate of Robert Mueller, who gave him his first job. He is a close protege of Mr. Comey. He is a bad apple. If you go to stonecoldtruth.com, I wrote a piece called The Three Amigos that outlines the intersection of these three gentlemen's careers. The president, if he's listening, should fire Rosenstein now. Some people say, well, if he fired Mueller, that would cause a firestorm. Probably correct. Fire Rosenstein. It will be barely a bonfire.
So I guess this is the anniversary month of Trump taking effective office. What's your review, Roger? How do you think he's been doing?
Well, when you consider the implacable opposition by the Washington-based mainstream media, when you consider the implacable opposition of the elite leadership of both parties, when you consider the two-faced and duplicitous nature of the current Republican and House leadership, it's amazing the president has gotten as much done as he has. And it's amazing the impact that that has already had. The tax cut, I think, is a signature achievement. The travel ban is a signature achievement. Just enforcing our current immigration laws on our southern border is an achievement. The appointment of a conservative Supreme Court justice who is most distinguished is an achievement. What are the results of these actions? And I should also mention the wholesale cutting of regulation at all levels. A boom stock market, unemployment at historic low levels, a boom in the housing market, a new realistic foreign policy as it regards Islamic terrorism. The president goes to Mar-a-Lago over the Thanksgiving holidays he posts on his Twitter feed a stunning video of Islamic terrorists killing a handicapped Dutchman, and the mainstream media goes crazy as if there's something wrong with that. Sorry, folks, new sheriff in town. This administration calls out and opposes Islamic terrorism. It doesn't pretend it doesn't exist, like the previous administration. So, to answer your question, Stefan, I think the president has made extraordinary strides, particularly in consideration of the across-the-board opposition that he has faced.
Well, it's funny, too, because the numbers came out recently. I think it was a 43% approval rating. And this was, of course, compared to Obama, which at this time in his administration had a 43% approval rating. And to me, this is like the difference between two people coming across the same finish line in a running race, one of whom is carrying an anvil and the other of whom is on a horse, because there was so much support to keep Obama's numbers buoyed and so much suppression to keep Donald Trump's numbers down that the fact they end up equivalent means to me, objectively, that Trump is far more popular in America than Obama ever was.
Well, that's conceivably true. Look, all polls, unless you're conducting the poll yourself, have to be taken with a certain grain of salt. There's a lot of variables here. There's the methodology. There's the sample size and whether it has been drawn properly to show an actual scientific balance. There is the order of the questions. There is the wording of the questions. So this explains to a great degree why virtually every poll, with a few exceptions, showed that Hillary Clinton would handily defeat Donald Trump. Didn't happen. And therefore, I look at these polls on presidential popularity as fleeting and perhaps not all that credible. The president is in a highly charged, extremely partisan atmosphere. You'll notice he got no honeymoon, which has been tradition for American presidents. Therefore, I agree with you. I suspect he's doing better than the current polls might suggest. And I also think that he retains a governing majority, that his coalition is completely intact. And I think that is one of the keys, both to the 2018 election and beyond.
My big concern, Roger, is the DACA question about what's going to happen to the hundreds of thousands of illegals, I guess, brought in as children. There does seem to be some indication from the administration that in return for the wall and improved border security, that amnesty may occur, a path to citizenship may occur, which statistically is going to be disaster in the long run for the Republican Party, turning it all, basically all of America, into what California has become. What are your thoughts on how this may play out? Because it seems to be fairly imminent.
Well, under no circumstances should the president give the Democrats what they want on DACA unilaterally. The wall is vitally important, though, because, pardon me, the wall is an issue well beyond the question of illegal immigration and the security of our borders. It's now become a symbol. And the president is a deal maker. He's a pragmatist. He's not an ideologue. I also think, unfortunately, in the DACA question, the public relations aspects of being opposed to children are potentially disastrous. Here's why I think this may work out. When people become citizens, when they get a piece of the American dream, when they see the ladder that leads to the top, we should not assume that they will spend their life voting for Democrats. We should not assume that they are going to be habitual criminals. I suspect there are many people in this category who are good, decent people who want a piece of the American dream, who aspire for the freedom and opportunity that is America. So let's see where the president goes on this, but no unilateral deal under any circumstances.
Well, yeah, the challenge is, according to the Center for Immigration Research, we've got 3/4 of the DACA, I guess, quote, kids. They're mostly adults now, but 3/4 of them are illiterate or close to illiterate in English. Fewer than half of them have completed high school. This is not a group that you would normally choose to gain the crown jewel of American citizenship, but we'll have to see how that goes. Of course, if there is an improved economy, this is one of the funny things about success when you border a third world country, is that if you have an improved economy, that actually draws people across the border, and therefore an improved economy, lower unemployment, can serve to increase or aggravate the problems of illegal border crossings. So if you're going to have a very strong economy, I think the wall becomes very necessary.
I concur.
Let's turn to something that you have had conversations with the president about regarding the JFK documents, that he, I guess, had the power to keep them sealed for another 25 years. But you talked to him about that. And what did you say, and why was your case so strong?
Well, in 1992, the Congress passed a law which set a timetable for release of all of the confidential documents that pertain to John F. Kennedy's assassination. And in the previous dumps, back in the 80s and 90s, we learned an extraordinary number of interesting things. We learned, for example, that President George H.W. Bush had prevaricated about his presence that day. He lied about where he was, misled people for 30 years. We also learned in that first dump that the Russian KGB conducted their own investigation into the Kennedy assassination, and they concluded that Lyndon Baines Johnson had been the ringleader of that effort. We also learned that Jacqueline Kennedy had appealed to French intelligence. They conducted their own investigations, and they also pinpointed Lyndon Johnson as the perp. So this was the last and final tranche of documents. In July of last year, the National Archives put out a small group of those documents, very, very, very heavily redacted. So heavily redacted, that means blacked out, and so much material held back, Stefan, they were useless. You could conclude nothing from them. I believe that that was a test to see what they could get away with. Days before the October 26th deadline mandated by the law, in which the president would have to do nothing and the material would be released, but had the affirmative authority to delay release for another 25 years, I spoke to the president on this issue. I made a case for transparency and full disclosure. I sought to knock down what I knew would be the argument of the CIA, that their sources and methods would be revealed. Sorry, boys, you don't have any sources still on the payroll 55 years later. But if you do, why don't you name them for us? They cannot do so. So, therefore, the president ordered the material released. There was a separate tranche of the material that the intelligence agencies argued with him should never be released. He said, no, that's not a good idea. Let's delay it 6 months till I have time to look at it. See, that's how they operate. Oh, Mr. President, the deadline's today. You don't have time to read this. Why don't we just classify it forever? And the president didn't bite. Here's the moral of this story. The material that was released was very revelatory. We learned several things. The U.S. government's relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald was far more extensive than the CIA or the FBI had ever acknowledged. He was recruited by the CIA out of Navy intelligence. He worked as a paid informant for the FBI. He learned to speak Russian in a government language school.
He was, I think you pointed out, he was sequestered in a government agency that required extraordinarily high levels of clearance.
He also was not, in my opinion, in Mexico City. Somebody went to Mexico City claiming to be him, but we have J. Edgar Hoover caught on audio tape in a phone call with Lyndon Johnson, the president, saying, well, the fellow down there in New Mexico sure doesn't look like Oswald. There's more evidence of that in these recently released documents. But the government still redacted large amounts of what they did release. Here's the part I think they forgot. Under the 1992 JFK Document Release Act, any material that they redact, they must publish a explanation for why it has been withheld. and it must be published in the Federal Register by January 1st. That was a couple of days ago. That has not happened. And therefore, I believe Senator Grassley and Congressman Walter Jones are going to hold their feet to the fire, and hopefully we can get even more information. The president did, in my opinion, a bold and courageous thing. Why do the CIA and the other intelligence agencies, the FBI, oppose the release of this material? After all, these are events of 50 plus years ago. The answer is simple. Because the same things they were doing then, they do now. The leaking, the lying, the fabricating, the stalling. What was happening then? Well, I would argue the deep state was trying to undermine an elected president. What's happening today? Well, I would argue that the deep state, particularly with their leaks, are trying to undermine a duly elected president.
Well, what's interesting to me.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. You can check the rest of that out at Stefan Molyneux on YouTube. Check him out, subscribe, and check the rest of that video out. And, you know, government willing to expose their false flags, they don't like doing that. It makes them hard to keep their little charades up, because we know they do false flags. They've done it in the past. It comes out declassified later on down the road. And even though it doesn't awaken the mass populace, you have enough people that come across this type of information and they go, well, they're able to lie about this and this and this, and well, it went down the line. I don't have any more current declassified information about a coup or a false flag or, you know, whatever. But history's showing that they keep doing these type of things. So why should I believe it just stopped just because we don't have any more declassified information that exposed it? And that's the thing. It takes, you know, multiple presidents down the line, usually, to declassify this information. And they use it, basically, to make someone look bad or to justify why now they need to do something else that's, of course, not usually a good idea. But I really believe that the deep state will make up lies, make up, you know, accusations, incidents, and all this to undermine Trump and to tarnish Trump, even with, you know, oh, the economy's doing better. Oh, you know, this is doing better. That's doing better. It won't matter because they'll never make that stuff look good. And for the people that are on the fence that might watch a little bit too much mainstream media, they're going to be like, you know, I don't remember it being this bad under Obama. Well, if all you watch was Fox News, since that was the only channel that would speak out against Obama on the mainstream media, you might have heard it there. But when all the other networks lean left, and you're someone that, oh, you know, I get my news from multiple sources. I check NBC, you know, I check ABC, I check, you know, all the other, you know, Huffington Post, and I check multiple sources. You check multiple leftist sources that all are saying the same thing. That'd be like if I looked at all libertarian or constitutionalist type information. I don't. I give myself a headache reading all the information. Sometimes I get surprised because I actually agree with mainstream media on something. But of course, then I see more spin-off where that one legit argument is overshadowed by a whole bunch of BS. And a lot of people are claiming that's kind of how this new book that's out about the Trump presidency, many are saying that that's basically what that is. It's things taken out of context, things interpreted, things that just didn't happen like it's portrayed. So it's a whole bunch, how much of it actually happened the way, it's played out in the book, how much of it's, actually what was said. That's come into a lot of question lately by other people that aren't really Trump supporters at all. But they're like, well, I know this was taken out of context. I know this was taken out of context. I can only say, I know that for sure, which makes me question what else is in the book is out of context or not exactly how it happened. So, who knows? That's why we have multiple sources, but with this book, of course, all the mainstream media is jumping all over it and basically reporting as fact. But I think the more important thing is to really focus on the issues rather than, this, because, this is tabloid gossip, basically. What's actually going on? What laws are being passed? What foreign policies are actually, going on? What, legislators are doing? What's actually happening rather than what someone said behind closed doors to each other. I think a lot of any behind the scenes issues, the more those happen, they expose themselves in what happens, as they legislate and lead. When they come unraveled behind closed doors, they come unraveled in front of cameras. Look at Nixon, look at Bill Clinton. It's just, it becomes pretty evident pretty quick. Okay, where are we sitting on time? If I can get to this last one. Yeah, we should be good. Okay, give me a second here. Maybe. I don't know if it's going to launch. Okay, we're having technical difficulties here. Maybe. We'll get it figured out here real quick. probably hear my fans kicking on as everything's trying to reboot. Okay. Looks like we have it now. Okay, cool. We're back up. Give me a second. I'll bring this up. Okay, here we go. This is a short clip from We Are Change. Over 1,000 apps are spying on you right now. And I think things like this are important to really pay attention to. When you download a new app, go into your settings, check out, what access it's being granted. Because a lot of them default access to things they don't need access to. And you can, I know on iPhone, you can change that and disallow the access to information. So we'll get into this. And it's all working. Okay, here we go.
Thomas here reporting for wearechange.org. And if you've ever had that funny feeling that your smartphone was spying on you and your family, you would be 100% correct. Now, the majority of us realize that we do give up some semblance of privacy when we take on these smart devices, but the extent of which has nowhere near been exposed. And what we're about to go over today is really just a small sampling of what is going on. Now, the majority of you out there will not be familiar with a software called Alfonso that rides along more than 250 games in the various app stores between Google and Apple. This app is able to access and does access your microphone even when the app is turned off.
Through ACR, or automatic content recognition. Our ACR is embedded in all kinds of mobile apps that people use in the living room. Social media apps, gaming apps, news apps, a variety of them.
And what are they supposedly looking for? Well, they're supposedly looking for ad information to sell to companies to see what you watch on television.
We collect viewership data on a second-by-second basis from more devices in more households than any other company that measures TV advertising. Every time a show or an ad is aired, it is indexed by Alfonso using very sophisticated machine learning and computer vision to accurately identify all the information that's important.
Now, again, a lot of these are children's games, so they're literally spying on your child's TV habits. On top of that, when this information is accessed, it's also cross-referenced with your location, yes, your GPS service that's always on, and even some of the movies and other entertainment that you watch. So again, this can be used in a big data sense for companies to better advertise to their consumers. Now, of course, it doesn't stop with games. There are over 1,000 apps that contain this software, and it can even detect when your phone is in your pocket and not in use. However, in my opinion, this is really just a small sampling of the amount of Big Brother technology that's out there and being used in our smart devices, whether it be our televisions, our phones, or even our tablets and laptops. Many people are aware that the Vault 7 data dump showed that our smart TVs were indeed spying on us on behalf of the NSA.
Could your TV be spying on you? If you've got an internet-connected TV, that might be possible. Secret documents show how the CIA have turned TVs into bugging devices, giving the capability a code name, Weeping Angel, named, it seems, after characters in the Doctor Who TV series.
And Vizio earlier this year paid out $2.2 million because it was illegally taking customer information, aka the entertainment they were watching, and selling it to big data companies without their permission.
It's a popular TV brand and one of the world's largest manufacturers of internet-connected smart TVs. And now the Irvine-based company Vizio is accused of spying on its customers, secretly collecting information while you watch and selling it.
It wasn't just your viewing habits. They were combining all of this with all sorts of other information about you, household income, sex, marital status. a really invasive picture was being put together.
Of course, this practice is only going to get more and more pervasive. And if we are not careful, we will have no semblance of privacy whatsoever in our day-to-day lives. As always, if you like this video, please share it on social media. Follow me on Twitter at Jason Burmis. Hit the subscribe and like button. And please, folks, go to wearechange.org. Make that donation. It's only through your financial support that reports like this one are possible.
We Are Change, wearechange.org. Check them out. Subscribe. Now, I've talked about this before. They've been doing this for a lot longer than they even admit. And the thing is even when, we were talking about, smart TV spying on you and stuff, people are taping, duct taping a camera on the top of their TV going, oh, yep, my TV's spying on me now, being, comical about it. And then it comes out, oh, they're actually doing it. There's a lawsuit about it. So, again, another conspiracy theory that turned out to be true. There's other manufacturers that basically they put it in their little fine print that, this TV can spy on you, basically. What that company did, though, was even beyond just, listening to music in the background to hear, or, paying attention to what you're watching and what you're watching on one of your movie apps or whatever on one of these smart TVs. That one went way beyond that. But even, the other ones, when they tell you, don't do anything in front of this TV you wouldn't want everyone to see. If you decide to get butt naked by this TV, you are risking it getting out. So that becomes a little scary. I always tell people, watch where and what and who, when it comes to your cell phone. My camera on my laptop, it's always had something over the camera. Every laptop I've had that's had a built-in camera has had something over it. This was way before, Zuckerberg. We've talked about on the show way before all that came out. Again, we were conspiracy theorists. And then Zuckerberg, puts out a picture, and they look in the background, and he's got something over his camera. Oh my gosh, it's real. And everybody's like, oh yeah, you got to put something over the camera. But I've been saying that for years. Yeah, but that was when it was a conspiracy theory. Now it's actually true. No, it was true back then. You just didn't believe it back then. A lot of this is in the fine print, and this comes out. And the thing is people just don't want to believe it at first. I just went and spent, what's a smart TV now? It's, $700 for a 62-inch or, whatever size. Where when they first came out, they were, $1,800 and $2,000. People were, you spend that much money, you're living in denial because, well, you just spent that much money on that TV. You don't want to believe that it spies on you. You want to enjoy not having to hook something up to your TV to be able to watch Netflix like I still do. I don't have a smart TV. And the device I hook up doesn't have a camera and doesn't have a mic unless I plug one in. I don't do the smart TV thing. Don't need that in my house. Now, part of this comes down to the free market. Now, there's also push from the entanglement of a lot of these corporations and government when it comes to having the ability to spy. Some companies want to go, well, if it's going to have that ability, I at least want to make some, money off of it, so I'll sell information from it. But again, back to the free market, stop buying the smart TVs, or if you do, don't give it internet access. Don't hook up a Wi-Fi router. Run a simple modem. If you ain't got wired up, it can't connect to the Wi-Fi, and there you go. Well, then I can't use the Netflix app for search the internet on my TV. Nope. No, you can't. But, how much of your privacy? It's one thing, people have been giving up so much freedom for our safety. We must give up our freedom for our safety, and it hasn't made us any safer. Never has, never will. Now you're giving all your privacy away. It's already been invading us, and the only thing you can do is, in a free market, say, I'll only buy, a smart TV if I have this guarantee you're going to do everything to encrypt and firewall and not allow any of my information to get out. And Apple wouldn't help the FBI break the encryption. Even though hackers can do this stuff, it had to be outside help. Which I wonder if outside help meant some type of hacker working maybe in the CIA or something. Because you would think the government would have that capability. Well, they probably did, just not at the FBI. But companies should stand firm and say, we're going to do what we can. And then when, it's proven that it can be, keep doing things to try to ensure you're doing what you can to prevent hacking from anyone. Okay, sorry. Give me a minute. I had another article, but I'm not seeing it all of a sudden. Oh yeah, I rebooted. I'll pull it up here. Got a little bit of time, I should be able to cover it. Okay. Okay, if it loads. This one, what is hate speech? And I guess I could play the clip to reason.com is where I'm getting this. What is hate speech? We ask college students. What do you think of when you hear the term hate speech? For many, it conjures images of torch-wielding riots in Charlottesville or right-wing provocateurs like Milo. Yep, I can never pronounce his last name. Yiannopoulos. For some, such conduct seems reprehensible enough to meet government regulation or merit government regulation. But it turns out that defining hate speech isn't as easy as pointing to extreme examples of bigotry and racism. In the United States, First Amendment grants absolute protection of even the most vile speech as long as it doesn't directly incite violence. There is no legal treatment of hateful words, but the tide may be turning. 40% of Americans now believe the government should regulate so-called hate speech. And I'll play this clip real quick since we do have just a little bit of time. I won't play the whole thing. It's about 6 minutes.
We asked college students at the University of Southern California if somebody uses a racial slur. That's hate speech? Yeah.
I think that would be a reason to, like a crime.
What if somebody says Muslims shouldn't be allowed into the U.S.?
Yeah, that's hate speech.
What if somebody denies the Holocaust?
No, I don't have any understanding for that. You shouldn't be able to blatantly lie about something, especially like the Holocaust.
A female comedian says men are scum.
I don't believe that's hate speech.
All white people are racist.
No, I would say no.
I don't know. The First Amendment grants absolute protection of even the most vile speech, so long as it doesn't directly incite violence.
I hate white people. All of them. Every last iota of a cracker, I hate it.
But is the tide turning in America? 40% of Americans now believe the government should regulate so-called hate speech. But it turns out that defining hate speech is easier said than done.
Everyone thinks this is hate speech, this is hate speech.
Many who advocate hate speech laws in 2018 seem motivated by what they see as the rise of Trumpism.
Build that wall.
And hateful rhetoric on the right. And college campuses have become the epicenter of the free speech debate, with incidents of college students shouting down and even physically attacking controversial speakers becoming an increasingly common occurrence. So we talked to students at the University of Southern California about free speech and hate speech. One common refrain on campus is that hateful speech is actually equivalent to violence. Do you think hate speech by itself is an act of violence?
I do, yeah.
You know?
Your words can't, physically harm someone.
I think violence is more than physical. It's emotional, psychological.
If hate speech is violence, maybe it makes sense to regulate it like Canada, Australia, and most of Europe do. Many of the students we spoke to seemed open to the idea.
I think if people could understand the power of words, then maybe hate speech as violence could help us have restrictions that are not damaging or that could stop at a certain place.
Those kind of opinions are better said, left unsaid, because it just incites violence and hatred among everyone, you know.
Are you in favor of regulations that would stop people from doing that or that would make that a crime?
Yeah.
I would have no problem if it is regulated.
But then who determines what constitutes hate speech? While most respondents to a recent poll agreed that hate speech is immoral, 82% said it would be difficult to ban because people can't agree on what is hateful. Could people form a consensus around whether these things are hate speech?
Definitely not.
I think it would be really hard to agree.
And so does that give you pause and, make you think maybe the regulation would not do what I would hope it would do?
Yeah. Obviously that would be ideal if something like that could be into place. I just don't really see how it would be.
So I'll give you an example. So there was a French comedian and he was jailed for an anti-Semitic joke. Would you support that type of action?
No.
Advocates of hate speech laws often say that racists cloak themselves in the veil of free speech to attack vulnerable populations.
Having free speech is a great right for everyone, but when the more powerful have it, it's going to obviously work to their advantage more than the less powerful.
But social media provides examples of how speech codes often backfire and hurt the very minorities they are intended to protect. Facebook and Twitter are private companies free to ban whatever they deem to be hate speech, but their attempts to do so have resulted in bans of feminists saying that all white men are trash, and the platform suspended rapper Lil B for posting that white people are the only ones who really love their guns. You can tell they are violent people. Hateful speech might be hurtful, stupid, or just plain wrong, but if we deprive ourselves of the opportunity to hear it, we also lose the opportunity to rebut it. and the person who's willing to speak forbidden words gains a special power. When Austria imprisoned historian David Irving for Holocaust denial, he was greeted with a hero's welcome by a crowd of 10,000 in Budapest shortly after his release. The government had turned him into a martyr. In America, attempts to shut down or shout down speakers have almost certainly backfired as well, by boosting the visibility of provocateurs like Milo Yiannopoulos.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
Trump saying any of these things should definitely be regulated because he has so much influence in him saying these in speeches and stuff.
Trump saying things about minorities like Hispanics and women and Muslims.
Does it concern you that if the government is the one that's regulating these things, that people like Trump would be the one deciding what is protected speech and what is not?
Yeah, of course, that's another concern.
Granting the government the power to decide what's acceptable to say presumes that what brings us closer to the truth is not the free exchange of ideas, but the wise decision-making of politicians. And many of the college students we spoke to agreed that being exposed to challenging and even threatening ideas is an important aspect of the intellectual journey.
And what do you think about people shutting down speakers on campuses?
I don't like that at all. Honestly, I follow a lot of what goes on at Berkeley, where they like protest and not how these far-right speakers come. And I think that's dangerous, to be perfectly honest.
Here at USC and on college campuses, it's important that we hear everything we possibly can, whether that be something that we don't like or something that rubs us the wrong way. I think it's important that we hear it because we're going to go out into the world and we're going to hear it there. And it's important that we're able to hear it here and form our own opinions and our own ideas.
And you can check out We Are Change for that. You can also find on YouTube, or not We Are Change, Reason.com, and Reason on YouTube, Reason TV on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe on YouTube, check out Reason.com, have a lot of good articles. And, you find this when you challenge more open-minded people, you can tend to ask questions too, you can have a conversation with, and the way they approached that, was really a good way not to start some type of conflict, but to really just, okay, you agree with this, well then who would do it? Well, government would have to do it, okay, and, well, Trump's government and you don't like what he says, but then he would be in charge of regulating speech, or, who would be in charge, see how it could backfire, maybe government shouldn't regulate, and do you agree with them shutting down, protests or speeches by protesting and rioting? No, because I think we should hear multiple sides, so then we probably shouldn't, try to regulate hate speech. Because guess what? People interpret different things as hate speech. Kind of no-win situation. And I think for the most part, the majority of people are good-hearted. A lot of what divides us is simple fact. Government's involved with our lives and tries to dictate to us. They dictate through our tax dollars. They dictate through regulation, thuggery, using federal government agents to go after things that are legal in a state. Hopefully, even though Jeff Sessions put that memo out, hopefully maybe the agency won't change what they're doing and, leave the states alone. Maybe Republicans will come out and oppose his memo, or the rescinding of a memo. But, we'll see what happens with that. We have to look at differing opinions, like I said, to multiple sources and not just mainstream. You have to really, in these days, you have to be able to research. You have to look at